Roy Halladay, one of the greatest pitchers in the history of baseball, but it wasn't always that way. Roy's story is one of resilience, failure, success, determination, and dominance, but unfortunately was capped off by anxiety, depression, and addiction, which led to his ultimate demise. Roy Halladay was my favorite baseball player. I tried to emulate him on the field in every way during my Little League games. I had number 34 shirts and jerseys. I played countless hours of MLB 2K11 just because he was on the cover. A poster of him hung up on the wall in my room. I wanted to be just like him. He was humble, stoic, the hardest worker in the room, and he was the best pitcher in the league. But nobody knew what he was dealing with internally. Today's video is the fourth and final episode of the Four Aces series, a series where I take a look at each of the Phillies' four aces from the 2011 team and unfold their individual stories. Roy Halladay's was intentionally saved for last. This video is meant as a tribute to my favorite player, Roy Halladay, and to hopefully give the viewer a better understanding of Roy Halladay, not only the player, but the human. Roy's wife, Brandy, understandably has a very hard time reliving her husband's tragic final years, but she's been fairly open about it because she wants people to know there was more to Roy. I don't want his end story to be Roy Halladay's a drug addict who crashed his plane, she says. And that's the purpose of this video, to pay tribute to Roy's legacy and help to contextualize his struggles. If at any point you enjoy what you're watching, be sure to leave a like, as that tells me I'm doing something right. Please feel free to comment your memories of Roy Halladay and subscribe to the channel for more videos of this nature. Now, onto the video. Growing up, Roy Halladay loved two things, baseball and airplanes. His father, also named Roy, introduced him to planes at a young age as Big Roy was a commercial pilot. Stick to the task until it sticks to you, for beginners are many and finishers are few, his father says he would tell his son. Baseball and flying were two passions that stuck to young Roy. Fast forward to 1995, the Blue Jays selected the gangly 6'6", 18-year-old right-hander from Colorado in the first round of the MLB draft. He made it to the big leagues by 1998, and in his second career start, he came within one out of a no-hitter. In 1999, he turned in a solid season with an 8-7 record and a 3.29 ERA, and the Blue Jays rewarded him with a 3-year, $3.7 million extension. But by the end of the 2000 season, it seemed like Toronto had signed away on a charity donation. Halladay finished the 2000 season with a 10.64 ERA and a whip over 2 to go along with his 4-7 record. Halladay's career had suddenly taken a turn for the worse. A kid who looked like he had a promising future just turned in a double-digit ERA across 19 appearances. By spring training 2001, the Blue Jays were ready to cut their losses. Not only did Roy not make the opening day roster, but they didn't just send him to AAA. He got sent all the way down to Single-A Dunedin in a move that the Blue Jays declared internally was an effort to fix Halladay just enough that he'd at least have some trade value and they could get rid of him. They enlisted the help of organizational pitching instructor Mel Queen, who had an extremely unique approach to helping pitchers, a method he referred to as vigorous leveling, but to the untrained eye is seemingly just belittling and insulting another man. That was the jolt Roy needed, though. Before Queen got to working on him, Roy was seriously considering leaving baseball and going back to school. He was too embarrassed to go back to his home state of Colorado, so Florida became his permanent home. He told his wife Brandy, "I would jump out the window, but with my luck, I would only break my leg, and I would still have to go back out on the mound." Roy embraced Queen's unorthodox methods and committed to being the best pitcher he could possibly be. They changed his delivery from an upright over-the-top motion to the patented hunched-over posture and three-quarters delivery we learned to identify him by. Roy later said, "After being sent down to the minors, I vowed that if I was going to be out of baseball, I would be able to look back and say I did everything to the best of my ability." That was the mentality he adopted for the remainder of his career, and it served him well, to say the least. When he was sent to Dunedin, he was an uninterested, uninspired, unmotivated kid whose career had been a failure to this point. When he returned to the big league club in late 2001, and for the entire 2002 season, that kid was gone. He was a new person entirely. He was now Doc Halladay.
Doc, sorry to be in bed. What the hell are you doing this for anyway?
Wide Up is my friend.
Hell, I got lots of friends.
I don't.
Doc was a nickname given to him as a reference to the Wild West gunslinger Doc Halladay. Well, Doc Halladay became something of a gunslinger himself to the tune of a 19-7 record, 2.93 ERA, and a league-leading 239 1/3 innings pitched in a 2002 All-Star campaign. If you didn't believe the doctor was in after 2002, he made sure you were well aware in 2003 as he took home the American League Cy Young Award thanks to a 22-7 record with a 3.25 ERA, another season leading the league in innings, and a league-best 9 complete games, something he'd go on to lead the league in 6 more times in his career. In that season, Halladay started 36 games. He walked just 32 batters. 2 men in American League history have ever had a season with over 200 strikeouts and less walks than games started: Roy Halladay and Cy Young himself. It was during these years, his return from the minors, that Roy developed his calculated approach to pitching. He had a plan that worked for him and he followed it every day to a T. He'd do the same workouts with the same sets and same reps. When he threw bullpens, he threw the same amount of pitches every time, hit the same marks, the same release point in an almost robotic fashion. He had the same spot in the dugout every game, marked by his water bottle and towel. One of his teammates accidentally sat there once, and he said Roy just gave him the look. He instantly got up and apologized, an interaction Roy would have loved to avoid, as he didn't talk to anybody on days he was starting. He cataloged every single start, hitter, side session, workout, every last detail of his career in a notebook. He remained calm and quiet, as he'd always been, but when you're the best pitcher in the world, there's a much larger spotlight on your behavior, and Roy couldn't stand that. We'll never know because the two of them would never share this, but years later, as a member of the Phillies' Four Aces pitching staff, he and Cliff Lee may have bonded over the fact they were similar in this way. They kept to themselves and didn't enjoy the attention. Lee retired 10 years ago, and other than family and friends presumably, nobody has heard from him. As for Roy, sportscaster Dan Patrick spoke to him after his 2003 Cy Young Award victory, and Halladay told him after his career was over, "You won't see me, I'll just disappear." But on a baseball field, Roy did anything but disappear. From 2002 until 2011, Doc led all pitchers in wins with 170, complete games with 63, which is 30 more than CC Sabathia, who had the next most, and shutouts with 18. He led the league in innings 4 times. Doc was as durable as they come. He continued his dominance during those final 6 seasons with the Blue Jays, making 5 All-Star games and finishing in the top 5 in Cy Young voting 4 times. By the end of Roy Halladay's 12 seasons with the Blue Jays, they made the postseason a grand total of 0 times. The best pitcher in baseball had never pitched in a playoff game, and in 2009, he felt his career was winding down. At the 2009 deadline, the reigning World Series champion Philadelphia Phillies were looking to add to their rotation, so they called up Toronto to see what they were doing with their ace. The Blue Jays were hoping to take advantage of the Phillies' aggressiveness and get a king's ransom in return for Doc, but Ruben Amaro Jr., the Phillies GM, held steady. The Blue Jays were asking for prospects Kyle Drabek, Dominic Brown, Anthony Gose, and Jay Happ, who went on to become the runner-up for Rookie of the Year in 2009. The Phillies turned them down and settled for Cliff Lee, the reigning American League Cy Young. After the Phils fell short to the Yankees in the Fall Classic, they knew they had to do whatever it would take to put Halladay in red pinstripes. At the conclusion of the 2009 season, Halladay had similar thoughts. The Blue Jays fired their GM, and Alex Anthopoulos had taken over. Halladay and his agent called for a meeting where Roy informed the Blue Jays that he didn't know how much time he left in his career and he couldn't afford to go through another rebuild. Halladay was coming up on free agency, and the way Anthopoulos saw it was we can either trade him now and get a return, or we'll lose him and get nothing back. The future architect of the 2021 Atlanta Braves World Series champions knew he had to unload Doc. The challenge? Halladay had a no-trade clause and was only interested in playing for 2 teams, the New York Yankees or the Philadelphia Phillies. The Blue Jays shopped Halladay around the teams like the White Sox and Angels, but his camp continued to make it clear he was only playing for the Yankees or Phillies. The Yankees may have been the victors in the World Series in 2009, but the Phillies won this bout. They agreed to send top pitching prospect Kyle Drabek to Toronto along with Travis d'Arnaud and Michael Taylor, but it wasn't that simple. Phillies GM Ruben Amaro Jr. was tasked with 3 items before Roy Halladay would be a Philly. Number 1, Roy needed to agree to a contract extension. This wasn't just a rental. They wanted him here for the long haul. Number 2, Roy needed to pass a physical, standard procedure in sports transactions, and Roy was in good shape, so this wouldn't be a problem. Lastly, number 3. Instructions came down directly from team president David Montgomery that Cliff Lee needed to be traded. They had just acquired him a few months prior, and he was the lone bright spot in the World Series. Lee wanted to spend the rest of his career in Philadelphia, but Montgomery was worried about the future and worried about the prospects they were going to have to give up to acquire Halladay. He told Amaro the only way they could get Halladay was to replenish the farm system by trading away Lee. And so, on the same day the Phillies traded for Roy Halladay, December 15, 2009, the Phillies traded away Cliff Lee. Amaro reflected on the move years later. "It's something I didn't necessarily want to do," Amaro said. "That was kind of part of the deal. If you're going to keep dumping some of this talent out of the system, you better replenish. We had to answer to some people. It wasn't that we didn't want Cliff on our club, and it wasn't that I didn't want a super rotation." Halladay was represented by CAA, who gave him a phone call that the Phillies and Blue Jays had an agreement in place. He just needed to accept the contract extension. Roy and his family were flown to Philadelphia, joined by agents Greg Landry, Jeff Berry, and Brodie Van Wagenen. Van Wagenen, the future failed general manager of the New York Mets, who let Zach Wheeler walk in free agency, where he signed with the Phillies, and BVW threw criticism his way. But before he played a part in that ace going to Philadelphia, he was playing a part in this ace going to Philadelphia. When Halladay and company arrived in Philly, they checked into the hotel under Roy's alias he often used at hotels, Gymnasium. Halladay, his agents, and Amaro shuttled back and forth between the hotel and Citizens Bank Park countless times over the 2 days where negotiations stalled. Halladay and his camp wanted 5 years. Amaro and the Phillies had ruled that they didn't sign a pitcher to more than 3 years. Halladay sensed the talks were stalling and didn't fly to Philadelphia for nothing. He told his representation to get the deal done, work with 3 years. Both sides compromised and the deal was done. Amaro quickly dealt Cliff Lee to Seattle and later regretted not exploring all possible avenues for a Lee trade. The reason for the quick trade was purely for optics. He knew fans would be happy with the Halladay acquisition, but upset and confused by the Lee departure. He had to make it look like it was a 3-team trade, even though it wasn't. Roy Halladay was a Philadelphia Philly, and now he was likely thinking back to the conversations he and his father had before bed when he was a young boy. "Can you imagine," the father would say, "what it would be like to be in the major leagues? Can you tell me what that would feel like?" And the boy would imagine it. On another night, the dad might ask, "Can you imagine what it would be like to stand on the mound at Yankee Stadium?" And the boy would imagine it. But the big one, the father says, was always, "Can you imagine what it would be like to be on the mound for the World Series? Can you tell me what that would feel like?" The boy is now the best pitcher in baseball and finally on a team that can play deep into October. All these years later, the question still makes him dream. The team that had made back-to-back World Series had just added the best pitcher in baseball. Ahead of 2010, they were poised to not only make the World Series, but win their second title in 3 years. So what did Roy Halladay do in 2010? Well, nothing too crazy, other than win the Cy Young Award, lead the league in wins, innings pitched, complete games, shutouts, maintain a 2.44 ERA, and throw a perfect game. If you weren't convinced Halladay was the best pitcher in the league prior to this season, you sure were now. On October 6, 2010, Roy Halladay was finally making his first career postseason start. Drafted in 1995, 346 games, 2 Cy Youngs, and 15 years later, Doc was finally taking the mound for a start in October. The big question, how would he fare under the bright lights of playoff baseball for the first time? In Philadelphia, in front of a rabid crowd for Game 1 of the NLDS, against the best offense in the National League, the Cincinnati Reds. A lineup with 3 All-Stars and 2 Hall of Famers in Scott Rowland and Joey Votto, who will surely make it when his time comes. How would Doc fare?
Strike away, the 0-2. A bouncer. Ruiz. In time! Roy Halladay has thrown a no-hitter!
The second ever no-hitter in postseason history. Don Larson tossed one in the 1956 World Series for the New York Yankees. In the 53 years that followed, nobody else accomplished that feat. In Roy Halladay's first attempt, he got it done. He struck out 8 and walked 1 batter. One of my favorite Roy Halladay moments ever was what he did after the game in the clubhouse with all of his teammates calling for a speech. Roy pitched 2 games in the 2010 NLCS, a Game 1 loss and a Game 5 win to force a Game 6. In their respective NLDS, Doc threw a no-hitter against the Reds. Tim Lincecum, the Giants ace, threw a 14-strikeout complete game shutout against the Braves. When they dueled in Game 1 of the NLCS, the Freak got the better of Halladay, but in Game 5, Doc wouldn't let that happen again, even if he had to do it on one leg. After the first inning, Halladay didn't return to his customary spot on the bench, marked by his water bottle and towel. Pitching coach Rich Doobie went looking for him, only to find him in the tunnel in agony. Halladay told him he pulled his groin on the mound, prompting Doobie to walk over to the dugout phone to get someone warmed up when Roy stopped him. Doc had played 15 years of professional baseball to get to this point. He went through the darkest period of his career nearly 10 years ago when he got sent down to Dunedin and pondered quitting the game he'd go on to become one of the very best at. Think back to the declaration he made after that demotion. When he left baseball, he wanted to be able to say he did everything to the best of his ability. To him, that meant finishing this game no matter what. Halladay went on to throw what Doobie described as the gutsiest sixth innings you could imagine in the Game 5 victory. To this day, Doobie still wears the watch Roy gave to all of his teammates, coaches, clubhouse staffers, and front office personnel after his perfect game earlier that season, engraved on the back of each one, "We did it together." The Phillies fell short of their 2010 goal of winning the World Series. A Game 6 NLCS loss eliminated them from the playoffs. They were hungry for a championship in 2010, so when 2011 rolled around, they came back even hungrier. Halladay joined Cole Hamels on the Phillies pitching staff in 2010, and at the trade deadline, they brought in former Astros ace Roy Oswalt. Ahead of the 2011 season, Cliff Lee was a free agent, and much like Doc a season ago, he had two options on the table: the New York Yankees and the Philadelphia Phillies. Despite the Yankees offering $30 million more than what the Phillies did, Lee chose the Phils, as he felt it was his best chance at winning a World Series. And with a pitching staff known as the Four Aces, the Phillies were yet again poised to make a deep run in October.
To have a shot at pitching a perfect game and winning $1 million in Major League Baseball 2K11, you gotta hit your spots and you gotta keep the batters guessing. Last year, when I threw my perfect game, I had great command of all my pitches, but I couldn't have done it without my catcher, Carlos Ruiz. In the offseason, kind of miss him. Turkey or ham? Turkey, right? Yeah, fastball inside. Yeah. Every perfect game needs a Carlos Ruiz.
2011 was just another dominant season in the career of Roy Halladay. He started the All-Star game for the NL and finished second in Cy Young Award voting, only to Clayton Kershaw, who led the league in wins, strikeouts, and ERA. In most other years, Roy's 2.35 ERA in 8 complete games probably would have been enough to bring home the trophy. But Roy and his teammates only cared about one trophy, the Commissioner's Trophy. The Phillies won a franchise record 102 games in 2011, the best team in baseball. Entering the final series of the regular season against the Atlanta Braves, the Phillies had the opportunity to choose their NLDS opponent. Had they lost to the collapsing Braves on the final day of the season, they would have faced their division rival in the playoffs. Instead, the Phillies played to the best of their ability and swept the Braves to close out the season, achieving a 102-win season and making Charlie Manuel the winningest Phillies manager of all time. They would now face the red-hot St. Louis Cardinals. But in Game 1, the red-hot Redbirds were no match for Roy Halladay. Well, after the first inning, that is. St. Louis jumped on Doc early with a 3-run first inning, but from that point on, Roy was near perfect. Like, as close to perfect as you can get. For the next 7 innings, he allowed just one base runner. And the Phillies brought offense in this one, putting up double-digit runs on the scoreboard, and just like that, the Phillies led the series 1-0. In a perfect world, Roy Halladay wouldn't have seen the mound again in the NLDS. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. The Cardinals ended up forcing a Game 5, and Doc was set to take the hill against his best friend, Chris Carpenter. Game 5 of the 2011 NLCS between the Cardinals and Phillies is one of the most important baseball games in either team's history. Halladay and Carpenter battle against each other in 2 amazing pitching performances. For Halladay, the Cardinals jumped on him early once again. A Rafael Furcal triple led to a first-inning run for the Cards, and Roy was in pain once again. He came back to the dugout in agony just like he did in last season's NLCS. This time, he felt a pop in his back. That wasn't known until years later. He kept it to himself, and after a 1-run first inning for St. Louis, that's all they would get. Fighting through extreme back pain, Halladay was dominant the rest of the game, just like Game 1. His final stat line read 8 innings pitched, 6 hits, 1 run, 7 strikeouts, and a loss. Carpenter dealt a complete game shutout against the Phillies offense that featured bats like Ryan Howard, Chase Utley, Jimmy Rollins, Hunter Pence, and so on. They couldn't muster a single run for Doc. That would be the final postseason game of his career. That game allowed the Cardinals to advance to the NLCS, and they later became the 2011 World Series champions. The Phillies, on the other hand, missed the postseason for 10 straight seasons following the loss. Roy Halladay never got another postseason start, and he never got a single World Series start. Post-2011, Roy Halladay might as well be an entirely different player. Game 5 changed his career and life forever. To stay on the field fighting through back pain, Roy began using prescription opioids. Roy led the league in innings pitched 4 times and had thrown 200-plus innings in each of the past 6 seasons. It was finally taking a toll on his body. Iron Man was breaking down. Doc was breaking down. On May 29th of 2012, 2 years to the day of his 2010 perfect game, Roy was placed on the disabled list. He started 25 games in 2012 with a 4.49 ERA, the highest ERA he had in a season since his life-changing 2000 campaign. That offseason, Roy got sick with flu-like symptoms, shaking, sweating, and unable to get out of bed. His wife, Brandy, implored him to visit a doctor, to which Roy broke down crying, admitting to his wife for the first time that he'd become dependent on painkillers for months and was experiencing withdrawal. Afraid to get help, he stayed in bed for 3 weeks, recovering on his own and telling anyone who asked he was just dealing with the flu. In 2001, Halladay vowed that if he was going to be out of baseball, he would be able to look back and say he did everything to the best of his ability. In his mind, he wasn't done yet. He geared up for the 2013 season, which came to an abrupt stop when he was placed on the disabled list again with a shoulder injury. He had surgery and his family was growing increasingly frustrated with him, his wife telling him she would no longer watch him put himself through this. Halladay finished the 2013 season with a 6.82 ERA. His 6.82 ERA in 2013 remains the second highest ERA for a Hall of Fame pitcher with at least 50 innings, second only to his 10.64 ERA in 2000. One of the most dominant pitchers of all time owns the 2 worst seasons a Hall of Fame pitcher has ever had, and both of those seasons would be life-changing for him. One helped him to become the best pitcher in baseball. The other led to his retirement. In December of 2013, Roy Halladay retired from baseball. In his retirement announcement, he acknowledged the end of his career was brought on by his shoulder problems, which were brought on by a stress fracture in his lower back and an eroded disc in his spine. The stress fracture and eroded disc were courtesy of Game 5 in 2011. In 2012 and 2013, Halladay pitched through a broken back, injuring his shoulder in the process and ending his career. Roy struggled finding meaning in life post-retirement. He'd been a professional baseball player for the past 20 years. He got more involved with his sons, coaching their teams, but was still battling with not only finding meaning, but addiction and depression. Searching for purpose, he rediscovered his love of flying. Brandy was well aware of his addiction at this point and was concerned about mixing that with something as dangerous as flying planes, but she understood he needed something in his life to look forward to. From 2013 to 2015, Roy entered drug treatment programs twice. During his first attempt, he left after he heard someone had snuck a cell phone in as he didn't want the public to know he was there. The second time, he saw improvements and began seeing a psychiatrist who treated him for anxiety and depression. Throughout retirement, he gave back to both the Phillies and the Blue Jays as a guest instructor, and in spring training of 2017, the Phillies hired him as a mental skills coach. Also in 2017, Roy purchased an aircraft, an Icon A5 described as a jet ski with wings. His father warned him repeatedly and told him that drugs and flying do not mix, but Roy assured him that he wasn't on any medication at the time. Halladay visited Icon's headquarters where the founder spoke with him personally and warned him to follow all safety guidelines, including never flying below 500 feet over anything. On October 26th, Roy had written in his logbook that he flew under the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, which had just 180 feet of vertical clearance. 12 days later, November 7, 2017, Roy drove his son to school and was going to return to the school later to attend his band concert with Brandy. At 11:47 that morning, Roy took the Icon A5 out for a flight. He had planned to fly north to Brooksville Airport, but instead went west, towards the Gulf of Mexico. Witnesses saw an airplane flying between just 500 and 300 feet above the water before it crashed nose down in the Gulf. Roy Halladay, at 40 years old, suffered blunt trauma and drowning. 2 years later, Roy Halladay was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Only close friends and family knew the struggles he went through during the final years of his life. When telling the story of Roy Halladay, it's impossible not to include the fatal plane crash that suddenly ended his life. But that's not the only thing that matters. To fully understand Roy Halladay's story, it's important to be aware of what we weren't aware of while he was alive: the depression, anxiety, and addiction. That helps us to contextualize the end of his life, but it also makes what he did on a baseball field that much more impressive. Roy Halladay's story is that of redemption, almost out of baseball, to the best pitcher in the game. And he did it silently. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't arrogant, he was just dominant. But in the same way he was silent about his success, he was silent about his struggles. Brandy Halladay spoke for Roy at his Hall of Fame induction, and she gave a quote that should resonate with everyone. Roy would want everyone to know that people are not perfect. We're all imperfect and flawed in one way or another. We all struggle. She continued about his struggles another time. He still wanted to be a good person. I think the hardest part is knowing what was in his heart. I know what he wanted. He just couldn't do it. And that's the heartbreaking part. Roy Halladay's story is heartbreaking, but it's a reminder of one simple fact. Everyone struggles. And on a lighter note, Halladay supplied Blue Jays fans with endless memories, and as a Phillies fan, he certainly did the same for us. The Blue Jays and the Phillies retired as number 32 and 34 respectively. At the Rogers Center in Toronto and Citizens Bank Park in Philadelphia, there's a constant reminder of Roy's career and the impact he had on teammates, coaches, fans, and anyone who ever watched him pitch. Roy Halladay was the greatest pitcher I ever saw with my own two eyes, and that's the way I remember him. That does it for this one. That does it for the Four Aces series. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Also, feel free to comment. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.